So the next thing I want to talk about is essential questions. And this can be a little bit tricky for a lot of people because it feels like it's kind of like an objective, but put in a question format, and that's really not what it is. So I want to make sure that we're pretty clear about what an essential question is, and you'll see that again right underneath your context, rationale, and central focus on your lesson plan template. So each plan you write should have at least one essential question. At least one. And so that means that you can have multiple essential questions, but try to find a question that is going to focus you and the students in and is something that they want to answer. Essential questions essentially are open ended, they help organize and set the focus for the lesson or unit, they initiate creative and critical thinking, they assist students in making real world connections to the English language arts content. So your lesson should lead students toward an or the answer. So because they are open-ended, usually there is not going to be a singular answer to your question, but you do want to make sure that if you're going to pose a really intriguing and interesting essential question in the beginning, that you at least lead them towards answering it for themselves by the end of the class. Essential questions, as I mentioned up front, they are not a restatement of objectives in question form. They are open-ended in nature, and so typically your objectives are going to be measurable and you want them to have a complete and neat and tidy sort of tying up at the end. Essential questions won't have that necessarily. So essential questions, they have no simple or right answer. They should provoke and sustain inquiry. They should address conceptual or philosophical foundations. They should raise other important questions. So they should maybe once they have an answer for themselves on your one essential question, it might lead them to another level of questioning as well. They should be naturally and appropriately recurring throughout either your lesson, or also they can be unit level or even course level in nature. They should stimulate vital, ongoing rethinking and can be answered before and after a reading to gauge change in thought. And so this is an interesting part of it, is that it might, students may enter with what they think is an appropriate answer to your essential question, and then you may read a text and it completely changes the way they think about that question. So what makes a question essential? So as we've already mentioned, it recurs throughout all of our lives. And so this is not just based on reading necessarily, it is based on this notion of how is this text that we're reading today, how is this project that we're working on going to come back and help me answer questions about my life? They refer to core ideas and inquiries within a discipline, so they are related in some way to the English content, but they don't need to only live in that space. They should help students effectively inquire and make sense of important but complex ideas, knowledge, and know-how. They should engage a specific and diverse set of learners, and so it should not just be geared towards one group of students. It should be something that everybody in the class can answer, and with their own lived experiences and their own cultures, they might be able to bring in different responses to your question as well. So an example. So let's look at what this would be. So an essential question might be something like, must heroes be flawless? And so you might be reading something like the Odyssey, and you might ask a question in the beginning and say, must heroes be flawless? And so students might say, yeah, in order to be a hero, we want them to be sort of the best role model they can be, so they should have no flaws. But then you read the Odyssey and you see how complicated Odysseus is, and students might have a different answer by the end of that unit. Who is entitled to own what? So again, a very general, very generic question that talks about things like perhaps equality and who gets to own what, and broader questions about the way society is set up. Who is the subjunctive? Is the subjunctive necessary? What makes writing worth reading? Does practice make perfect? You can see how these are a little bit more geared towards literacy and language and those types of things. And so you can see also that it's not just a matter of looking at general broad societal questions, but you can point to things within the English language arts curriculum, like what makes writing worth reading. It's still very much a curricular question, in English language arts, but it is something that is a little bit more general. What is healthy eating, healthy living? Those types of questions are things that really recall things that are perhaps more personal to students. Something you want to avoid are leading questions. Leading questions are meant to culminate in a fact or completely settled conclusion. There is no sustained inquiry or argument intended or necessary. It underscores an important point we want students to note, but it does perhaps just sort of close things off. So, what 8 parts make up a sentence? Is that an important question? Sure. That is something that we want students to be able to identify perhaps in our English language arts curriculum, but it is a closed off and a leading question. You can throw 1 or 2 in these in maybe an entire school year, but you do want to make sure that a lot of them are a little bit more intriguing than this, okay? We need these too, but they cannot be the foundation of our curricular design. So maybe 1 or 2 of your essential questions are leading and closed off in this manner, but you do want them to lead to more questions. So where to start? You need to determine big ideas. A great starting point is the Georgia Standards of Excellence and Common Core State Standards. We will talk much more about these in a later video. Look at your course texts to seek out what the big ideas are. Topics that are poignant to you and you think will resonate with your students. So getting to know your students is really important in crafting your essential questions. And then finding big ideas, again, you can look at your standards and circle key nouns and adjectives and verbs. You can look at those keywords and sort of start drafting those big ideas and maybe keeping a list somewhere. Critically analyzing your course text, you might work backward to determine what big ideas and or essential questions those texts address. And so look at your texts, look at your standards, and really start thinking purposefully about what your essential questions might be. So looking more specifically, here's a standard from the Georgia Standards of Excellence. The learner will be able to read, respond to, and critique historically and culturally significant works of literature. In order to understand their importance in relationship to past and present cultures. Your overarching or maybe perhaps a unit or even year-long question that you might be trying to answer with every text that you read is, does literature primarily reflect culture or does it shape it? And so you can see how that's a general question, and you can read one text and the answer might be it reflects culture, and then you might read another one and situate it historically and say that it shapes it. And so there, you don't need to have one simple answer for all of your questions, obviously. And then you might read a specific text like Romeo and Juliet and ask, what does Romeo and Juliet teach us about Shakespeare's view of destiny? Okay, something that is not easily answered or responded to, but it does ask something pretty enticing. How does his view of destiny compare to your view of destiny? And so, again, making it rather personal to students is important. As we look at the essential question that I pose in my lesson plan, what role should personal choice play in finding a career? Is it the best essential question? Maybe not. It's not maybe as provocative as I would like, but it does certainly respond to what students' interests and knowledge are, what their careers and lives might be, and it helps us play on this notion of looking forward and bringing text into your personal life. So what role should personal choice play in finding a career is a pretty straightforward one. Again, I would want to gear, and I want to encourage you to think of ways that you can be provocative with your essential questions. So really that is the key. How can you create and craft a question based on your objectives, based on your standards, that is a question that students want to answer and that applies to their personal life, and that might help them respond differently to different texts.